3 out of 1,000. That's the stated rate of bad spawns in World War II, with a bold statement attached to it that it's the best spawn rate in the Call of Duty franchise. And while we're only a month into the game and it might not seem far enough along into the life cycle to call something like that something that bold, whether you believe in it or not, the billions of spawn point data entries that are cataloged on the back end at Sledgehammer are enough to solidify a rate that is in fact comparable to other titles in the franchise. But here's the thing, does that number actually hold up? Is it actually the accurate rate? Because if it is, how does it explain the community's thoughts and experiences with bad spawns in World War II? So in this video, we're gonna be taking a look at and examining the spawn algorithm at its core and seeing just how the system works. So brace yourselves, because we're gonna get technical and start diving into the innards of this year's title. One thing though to bear in mind is that the things we're gonna be talking about are the very base constants. And these values were pulled up from Lacking a Good Name over on Reddit. So while these are something that are a base value for the game and the spawn algorithm, how the system works, it's not the only variables that are considered. So while some things might not necessarily add up in this video, take into consideration that there are a dozen other factors that are buried beneath things that are accessible in the game code itself. But that said, let's jump into it. When a player thinks about a spawn point, they often think about having at least a few seconds to jump back into the fight, or at least they simply want the comfort of being able to recognize the lay of the land upon respawning so they can be ready for whatever gunfight might be coming at them. But as in every game with a respawn point, it is possible to predict, know, and even control spawn locations to the point where spawn trapping is a thing. And no, I'm not talking about the sort of spawn trapping I'll angrily mutter about under my breath when I walk around out of spawn on Point to Hawk and get killed as I round a corner a solid 5 seconds or so out of spawn, despite feeling like I didn't progress too far enough into the map. The spawn trapping I'm referring to is the pure and utter locking in spawns, such as actually watching the player spawn or having the safe haven of their spawn so tightly kept they can only peek out and then will die, similar to what we see on Ardennes Forest, Gibraltar, Aachen, and a few other main spawns out of those maps. These are the sort of spawns that you might directly relate to in World War II. So what drives these spawn systems? Why can you feel like you're trapped in World War II? That actually comes down to a various number of factors. The first of which is how close can an enemy player be? So the enemy distance is a big factor in the spawn system, and obviously we don't want to see players getting lit up like Christmas trees the absolute second that they spawn, very similar to the sort of spawn traps that we'd see in Terminal in Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, which still gives some flashback moments when I think about spawn traps, but the catch is that the Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3 full-blown traps still did not invade the spawn points to where they flipped. And while the general knowledge of locations are known, it's a similar case in World War II. Locations are known, but there's a large enough gap between attacker and spawning player that the values are not triggered. So in World War II, the minimum enemy distance used in the avoid enemies factor is 2,600 inches or 66 meters, or for my fellow Americans, roughly 217 feet. So while it's often incredibly hard to gauge in-game scale, let's figure each character model is about 6 feet tall. So that would bring the distance between spawn to the enemy player to be around 36 player model lengths, to which at first this seems really strange, but when you think about some of the maps and their spawn ranges, it does make sense. It's oftentimes these spawns at the edge of the map, and you also can consider the lanes of sight on Gibraltar, Ardennes, Aachen, and other larger scale maps such as this, and those ranges are rather large in a logical perspective. Now, as for the smaller maps, perhaps say Point to Hawk, those numbers may be a bit too high, but we also have to bear in mind the other factors that are below the surface. And one of those things is that spawn point is determined upon death, so it breaks down even further than what you might consciously think about. We need to remember that play continues even if you end up dying and, say, decide to watch that kill cam. So in that theoried sense, if you do watch the kill cam, if each cam is roughly 5 seconds long, that's 5 seconds the enemy has to rotate to get into a better position. So unfortunate, yes, that it also does kind of hinder the ability to grant a better spawn if you so choose to watch that, but that's just the way that game pace can have an effect. Now, while it's not detailed specifically, it is something that I have known personally that on these smaller maps, if you end up watching compared to not watching, your experience will definitely have a greater impact on what happens with that spawn point. That's just something that I've picked up over the time in World War II and also different titles in general. So that sort of thing just is one that necessarily isn't detailed by the actual game code and the spawn constants, but is something that is just a byproduct of the pace of the game. Now, as there are also set spawns like the base spawns that we'll see, say, at the start of the game, or domination capture points, there are separate locations that can be flipped to, and the defined minimum for those locations are described to as 18 meters or 700 inches from the previous spawn. So bear in mind, this is a minimum. There's also other spawn points that you can be flipped out to, and if overrun, you'll also be choosing to spawn at those points. But what defines switches in spawns like these, and also what may be a full flip across the map? Now, spawn flipping or switching is something that I myself, and probably a lot of you guys, hope for whenever we see a few deaths in the alleyways, but flipping is often the byproduct of nearly all spawn factors being invaded by enemies. One player can invade a spawn, which may result in a spawn change, something that is maybe halfway up the map or something like that, maybe a third of the way across the map from where your initial base spawn point is. But if we end up taking a look at what triggers, say, an entire flip, that's usually the byproduct of multiple players or a number of players invading multiple spawn points at one single time on one side of the map. Now, while we already detailed that there are parameters for how close an enemy can be before they trigger the secondary core constant values that define spawns, there are a few other things that we need to bear in mind as well. There's a spawn constant that takes into consideration the minimum distance from an ally who recently died, that being the avoid allied death location constant, to which that factor is 20 meters. So if someone died a second before you and the game was looking to spawn you in that spawn point or in a general vicinity of that, if it was within 20 meters that your teammate died, the game would reevaluate and select a different location, essentially being like, all right, we're gonna go, oh wait, no, we're not gonna go there. But that said, when we talk about death locations of enemies, we also have to bear in mind that we can't just deal with distance alone. We also have to take into consideration the time since the death, and that's another key factor. While the minimum time factor is omitted, the maximum amount of time that the game will perceive a spawn as safe is 6 seconds and then 8 seconds on Flak Tower. So theoretically, there should be no issues after that point in time, but whether or not there is, it's not always perfect. That said, if an enemy triggers these constants, it should prompt the game to prioritize another spawn over one that a player may currently hold. Whether that to be a secondary spawn point on the same side of the map or a full flip depends on how many of these constants are obstructed and how many players are obstructing that spawn process. So once again, there's a handful of variables to take into consideration when we talk about spawns at their basic and numerical core values. As well, we also have to take into consideration that each game mode will add on certain different parameters for each different string and constant, some even adding more constants or putting in new rules, if you want to set it that way, for how the spawn system will work. Domination is probably one of the most prominent of these, in which there are things like the domination point to close distance, to which it's a maximum distance from a domination flag which your spawn point is considered to be too close, and it's used to avoid enemies in terms of the distance factor once again, to which that value is 25 meters, and then there's also a domination point preferred last team spawn time, to which the maximum time from the last ally spawn at that spawn point is used in the preferentiated spawn. That value then would be 22 seconds. Now, once again, there's a bunch here that go much more so beneath the surface. Some of these things for data miners are rather accessible and very easy to access, but others not so much. So these are just the base core values that are on the surface. As well, there's also other things to take into consideration, such as preferred claimed spawns in Team Deathmatch and preferred claimed spawns in Domination and other modes alike. And while all of this is nice, what truly is a spawn kill? Because we referenced the 3 out of 1,000 bad spawn rate earlier in the video, but none of what we mentioned seems to hit the nail on the head with a core definition of a spawn kill, and knowing that definition could be the key to understanding why Conjurer proclaimed the 3 out of 1,000 spawn rate and how prominent it actually is. This all comes down to a variable known as LOS distance, or line of sight distance. This is the maximum distance from an enemy that can see you in which you are considered in their line of sight while spawning. So this variable sets the parameters of what a spawn kill truly is. After this maximum distance, you could have a direct path with zero obstruction or debris, and you could watch a character model appear in thin air and it would not be considered in the line of sight because the damage drop-off for every weapon would be out of the one-hit kill range, even snipers. But the maximum amount of distance the game will not let players see an enemy spawn is 81 meters or 46 on Flak Tower specifically. But the key part there is seeing the enemy spawn, and that's the key to the bad spawn rate that was proclaimed a little while ago over in the Twitterverse. We end up having buildings, rock faces, walls, and other things protect our spawns, and thus the enemy cannot physically watch our spawn on every single map. So that's why, say USS Texas, you can be trapped in the ends of the map, and why perhaps you can round the corner if you're the one trapping into the enemy spawn and see players just starting to move. It's because they spawned there and you weren't in their line of sight. So that's the crucial part to understanding how the spawn system really prioritizes what a spawn kill truly is, and what rounds out the in-depth look of the spawn system here in World War II. So that 3 out of 1,000 spawn data meme, well, while we may be having bad spawns, that number and data is pulled from a player directly aiming down sight and viewing a player as they spawn in. So literally that 1 second, no one is in their sights, and the next, someone is. So while spawns at times may be incredibly sticky and you may feel like someone is patrolling your spawn, technically it does fall in line with that data about the 3 in 1,000 bad spawn rate. We discussed the idea of this way back when this was first a thing and was a major discussion, to which we said it might just be different variables than what we as players would expect and what qualifies as a spawn kill. And that's what it seems like it is, with a knowledge of how the system runs at the time, and it seems like it's just different criteria. So while unfortunately that might not be what we hope for, technically the numbers don't lie. And I'm all for making more spawn adjustments. Don't take that the wrong way where I'm maybe jumping on the bandwagon of something where the spawns are great. I definitely know that they could have worked, but also there are so many variables that are so touchy, and if you fine tune one, could throw the entire system into disarray. So that said, it's something that will always be a touchy subject. It's always something that will be tough to manage. But whenever you have bad spawns, those usually stick in your mind more than if you have good spawns. So it might seem as sort of a placebo effect where you feel like you're getting them more and more, but in reality, a lot of what checks out with these numbers are in line, if not maybe even a little better than previous years and the spawn systems we had in place there. So that said, I wanted to give you guys a little in-depth look at how the spawn system works within Call of Duty World War II. This was something that floated across my field of view when I saw this and was immediately enamored by these constants and the intricacies that go into the spawn system within any game, no less. But that said, hopefully you guys enjoyed, hopefully gave you some insight, and of course, let me know your thoughts down there in the comment section down below. These are hard-coded facts in the game, and so while some things might be prioritized via constants that we might not have available to us on the surface, these are some of the base mechanics for the World War II spawn system. So hopefully you guys enjoyed, and if you guys did, make sure you drop a like down below, and of course if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe to stay up to date with everything we have here regarding Call of Duty World War II. If you guys are interested in anything regarding tips, tricks, news, breakdowns like this, best class setups, leaks, information, all that kind of stuff, we got you covered here up on the channel, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single thing. And finally, if you guys want to follow me over on Twitter, that's the best place to get connected with me outside of YouTube. I practically live on Twitter, so if you guys want to strike up a conversation, ask me a question, whatever it may be, link is down there in the description below. But all that said, out of the way, hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care, and peace.